The blood-stained doll had two initials carved into its porcelain chest. R.M. Charlotte found it under her bed on her first night in the billionaire's mansion. At midnight, the twins appeared in her doorway, whispering in perfect unison, "Don't go into the West Wing." Another one. "She won't last till dinner." Then the lights died. And in the absolute darkness, a voice that wasn't theirs breathed into her ear, "You should have listened." 17 caregivers before her. 5 quit screaming. 2 found dead. Charlotte knew she had 72 hours to find the truth, or become victim number 3. So she searched. And what she found in the twins' room stopped her heart. A crayon drawing of a woman falling from a balcony, a man's hands pushing from behind. Drawn 2 years ago. The night their mother died. The 8-year-old girls weren't the monsters everyone feared. They were witnesses to murder. And the killer was still in this house, watching, waiting. He'd already eliminated 17 people who got too close. Charlotte had just become number 18. And he just realized she was getting too close. That if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button for more. Also, share your thoughts and let me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, so don't miss out. Now, let's continue. Charlotte Lopez stood frozen in the doorway of the Miller mansion, watching 2 8-year-old girls sit motionless at a grand piano in the cavernous music room. The melody they played was beautiful and terrifying, perfectly synchronized notes that echoed through marble halls like a funeral hymn. But what shocked Charlotte most wasn't their eerie precision. It was the absolute emptiness in their eyes. "Another one," Evelyn whispered without looking up from the keys, her voice flat and mechanical. "She won't last till dinner," Abigail added, her small fingers never missing a note. Their golden curls shimmered in the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. They looked like porcelain dolls, beautiful, expensive, and completely lifeless. The twins had driven away 5 nannies and 2 maids in just 1 year. Some quit after a single night. Others were found dead under circumstances the police called unexplained. The tabloids had given them a name, the cursed Miller twins. But as Charlotte looked at these emotionless children, she didn't see demons or monsters. She saw 2 little girls drowning in something far more sinister than grief, 2 children trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. "Then let's make it to breakfast first," Charlotte said softly, stepping carefully over the threshold. The music stopped. Both heads turned in perfect unison, their pale blue eyes locking onto Charlotte with an intensity that made her breath catch. For the first time, something flickered across their faces, not hope or curiosity but warning. "The others tried to be nice too," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't listen," Abigail finished, glancing nervously toward the hallway behind Charlotte. Charlotte knelt down slowly, bringing herself to their eye level. "I know you miss your mother. And I'm not here to replace her. I'm here because I think you need someone who understands what it feels like when the world becomes a scary place." The girls exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them in a language only they understood. The tension in the room thickened, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. "You don't know anything about us," Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly. Charlotte took a deep breath. "You're right. I don't know everything about you yet. But I know that you're scared. I know that terrible things have happened in this house. And I know that you think if you stay quiet and keep everyone away, maybe you'll be safe." Abigail's eyes widened just a fraction, the first real reaction Charlotte had seen. The girl's hands twisted together in her lap, knuckles white with tension. "But here's the thing," Charlotte continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not going anywhere. And by the time the sun sets today, I'm going to show you something that will change everything." Evelyn's cold mask cracked for just a moment. "What?" Charlotte stood up, brushing invisible dust from her dress. "I'm going to show you that it's okay to trust someone again, even when everything feels dangerous." The words hung in the air for a long moment. Then, from somewhere deep in the mansion, a sound broke the silence. Measured footsteps, calm and deliberate, approaching with careful precision. The effect on the twins was instantaneous and chilling. Both girls went rigid, their faces draining of every trace of color. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists so tight her arms trembled. Abigail's breath came in short, shallow gasps. "He's coming," Abigail whispered, her voice barely audible, eyes fixed on the doorway behind Charlotte. "We shouldn't have talked to you," Evelyn breathed, sliding closer to her sister on the piano bench. "He doesn't like it when we talk." The footsteps grew closer, unhurried, controlled, as if whoever approached had all the time in the world. Charlotte felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She turned toward the double doors just as they began to swing open, revealing a tall, thin silhouette backlit by the hallway's dim light. But what Charlotte couldn't know, what no one in that house could have predicted, was that the man about to enter that room held the key to every death, every disappearance, every nightmare that had plagued the Miller mansion for the past year. She couldn't know that before the day ended, she would have to make a choice that would either save these girls or make her the next name whispered in fear by the servants' quarters. And she certainly couldn't know that the twins' warning wasn't about their father's anger at all. 1 year earlier, Lucas Miller sat alone in his corner office on the 52nd floor of Miller Technologies, staring at a framed photograph of his family. His wife's smile was radiant in the golden hour light. His daughters, barely 7 years old, were laughing as they chased bubbles across the lawn of their estate. It was the last photograph taken before everything shattered, before the accident that would steal his wife, transform his daughters into frightened strangers, and turn his magnificent home into something that felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. Lucas Miller had been told he was cursed so many times that he'd almost started to believe it. The blood-stained doll had 2 initials carved into its porcelain chest. R.M. Charlotte found it under her bed on her first night in the Billionaire's mansion. At midnight, the twins appeared in her doorway, whispering in perfect unison, "Don't go into the West Wing." Another one. "She won't last till dinner." Then the lights died. And in the absolute darkness, a voice that wasn't theirs breathed into her ear, "You should have listened." 17 caregivers before her. 5 quit screaming. 2 found dead. Charlotte knew she had 72 hours to find the truth, or become victim number 3. So she searched. And what she found in the twins' room stopped her heart. A crayon drawing of a woman falling from a balcony, a man's hands pushing from behind. Drawn 2 years ago. The night their mother died. The 8-year-old girls weren't the monsters everyone feared. They were witnesses to murder. And the killer was still in this house, watching, waiting. He'd already eliminated 17 people who got too close. Charlotte had just become number 18. And he just realized she was getting too close. That if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button for more. Also, share your thoughts and let me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, so don't miss out. Now, let's continue. Charlotte Lopez stood frozen in the doorway of the Miller mansion, watching 2 8-year-old girls sit motionless at a grand piano in the cavernous music room. The melody they played was beautiful and terrifying, perfectly synchronized notes that echoed through marble halls like a funeral hymn. But what shocked Charlotte most wasn't their eerie precision. It was the absolute emptiness in their eyes. "Another one," Evelyn whispered without looking up from the keys, her voice flat and mechanical. "She won't last till dinner," Abigail added, her small fingers never missing a note. Their golden curls shimmered in the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. They looked like porcelain dolls, beautiful, expensive, and completely lifeless. The twins had driven away 5 nannies and 2 maids in just 1 year. Some quit after a single night. Others were found dead under circumstances the police called unexplained. The tabloids had given them a name, the cursed Miller twins. But as Charlotte looked at these emotionless children, she didn't see demons or monsters. She saw 2 little girls drowning in something far more sinister than grief, 2 children trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. "Then let's make it to breakfast first," Charlotte said softly, stepping carefully over the threshold. The music stopped. Both heads turned in perfect unison, their pale blue eyes locking onto Charlotte with an intensity that made her breath catch. For the first time, something flickered across their faces, not hope or curiosity but warning. "The others tried to be nice too," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't listen," Abigail finished, glancing nervously toward the hallway behind Charlotte. Charlotte knelt down slowly, bringing herself to their eye level. "I know you miss your mother. And I'm not here to replace her. I'm here because I think you need someone who understands what it feels like when the world becomes a scary place." The girls exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them in a language only they understood. The tension in the room thickened, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. "You don't know anything about us," Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly. Charlotte took a deep breath. "You're right. I don't know everything about you yet. But I know that you're scared. I know that terrible things have happened in this house. And I know that you think if you stay quiet and keep everyone away, maybe you'll be safe." Abigail's eyes widened just a fraction, the first real reaction Charlotte had seen. The girl's hands twisted together in her lap, knuckles white with tension. "But here's the thing," Charlotte continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not going anywhere. And by the time the sun sets today, I'm going to show you something that will change everything." Evelyn's cold mask cracked for just a moment. "What?" Charlotte stood up, brushing invisible dust from her dress. I'm going to show you that it's okay to trust someone again, even when everything feels dangerous." The words hung in the air for a long moment. Then, from somewhere deep in the mansion, a sound broke the silence. Measured footsteps, calm and deliberate, approaching with careful precision. The effect on the twins was instantaneous and chilling. Both girls went rigid, their faces draining of every trace of color. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists so tight her arms trembled. Abigail's breath came in short, shallow gasps. "He's coming," Abigail whispered, her voice barely audible, eyes fixed on the doorway behind Charlotte. "We shouldn't have talked to you," Evelyn breathed, sliding closer to her sister on the piano bench. "He doesn't like it when we talk." The footsteps grew closer, unhurried, controlled, as if whoever approached had all the time in the world. Charlotte felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She turned toward the double doors just as they began to swing open, revealing a tall, thin silhouette backlit by the hallway's dim light. But what Charlotte couldn't know, what no one in that house could have predicted, was that the man about to enter that room held the key to every death, every disappearance, every nightmare that had plagued the Miller mansion for the past year. She couldn't know that before the day ended, she would have to make a choice that would either save these girls or make her the next name whispered in fear by the servants' quarters. And she certainly couldn't know that the twins' warning wasn't about their father's anger at all. 1 year earlier, Lucas Miller sat alone in his corner office on the 52nd floor of Miller Technologies, staring at a framed photograph of his family. His wife's smile was radiant in the golden hour light. His daughters, barely 7 years old, were laughing as they chased bubbles across the lawn of their estate. It was the last photograph taken before everything shattered, before the accident that would steal his wife, transform his daughters into frightened strangers, and turn his magnificent home into something that felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. Lucas Miller had been told he was cursed so many times that he'd almost started to believe it. The headlines were relentless. Tech billionaire's mansion of death. The Miller curse claims another victim. No one survives working for the widowed billionaire. Every tabloid, every gossip site, every local news station had turned his family's tragedy into entertainment. They dissected Rebecca's death like it was a murder mystery instead of the accident that had destroyed his world. They speculated about his daughters as if they were characters in a horror film rather than two traumatized children who had watched their mother die. Lucas stood at his office window now, 52 floors above the city, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of blood orange and deep purple. Below, people moved through their ordinary lives, going home to families that were whole, to houses that didn't echo with ghosts, to children who still knew how to smile. He used to be one of them. 2 years ago, Lucas Miller had everything. At 37, he built Miller Technologies from a small startup into a tech empire worth billions. He had a wife he adored, twin daughters who filled his life with laughter, and a future that seemed limitless. Rebecca had been the heart of their family, warm, vibrant, always knowing exactly what to say to make everything better. She'd balanced his intensity with her gentle humor, grounded him when success threatened to consume him, and loved their daughters with a fierceness that made him feel safe. Then came the night that shattered everything. Lucas closed his eyes, but the memory played anyway, as vivid and painful as if it had happened yesterday. He'd been working late in his study, absorbed in merger documents that couldn't wait. Rebecca had been putting the girls to bed, singing the lullaby she'd made up for them when they were babies. He remembered hearing her voice drift down the hallway, soft and melodic. Then silence. Then a scream, high and sharp and cut off too suddenly. By the time Lucas reached the west wing, Rebecca was lying in the garden below the balcony, her body twisted at an impossible angle. The French doors to the balcony stood open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. No one had seen what happened. No one could explain why she'd been out there alone. The police ruled it an accident, a tragic fall, possibly a moment of dizziness or distraction. But Lucas knew his wife. Rebecca was careful, methodical, never careless. She wouldn't have leaned over that railing. She wouldn't have. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. A text from his estate manager. New nanny arrived. Mr. Crane is conducting the introduction. Lucas's jaw tightened. Another nanny. Number 18 if he was counting correctly. Though after a certain point, the numbers blurred together into a parade of faces. Some stern, some kind, some desperate for the generous salary he offered. None of them lasted. Nanny number 6 had quit after finding all her belongings moved to a different room in the middle of the night. Number 9 swore she heard children crying in the walls. Number 12 lasted 3 days before she fled, claiming the twins had tried to push her down the stairs, an accusation Lucas knew was impossible because he'd reviewed the security footage himself. The girls had been in their room the entire time. Then there were the ones who didn't quit. The ones who died. Martha Chin, the housekeeper, found at the bottom of the grand staircase with a broken neck. The police called it a terrible accident. She must have tripped in the dark. But Martha had worked in the mansion for 5 years. She knew every inch of that staircase. Sofia Rodriguez, a young nanny who'd seemed genuinely fond of the twins, discovered in the locked garden shed, dead from what the coroner ruled as carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. Except the shed's heater had been inspected and deemed safe just weeks before. The press had a field day. The mansion was cursed. The family was cursed. Some even whispered that the twins themselves were somehow responsible, possessed by their mother's vengeful spirit, or born with some dark power that drew death to anyone who tried to care for them. Lucas knew his daughters. They weren't evil. They weren't possessed. They were just broken. Silent and withdrawn, spending hours staring at the garden where their mother had died, communicating with each other in whispers and glances that shut everyone else out. The vibrant, giggly girls who used to tackle him with hugs when he came home from work had disappeared the night Rebecca died, replaced by these quiet, haunted strangers who barely acknowledged his existence. He tried everything. Child psychologists who specialized in trauma. Play therapists. Art therapists. Grief counselors. The girls sat through the sessions with blank faces, saying nothing, giving nothing. At night, Lucas would stand outside their bedroom door and listen to them whisper to each other in a language that sounded almost like the twin speak they'd invented as toddlers, but darker now, urgent and frightened. They were slipping away from him and he didn't know how to pull them back. His phone buzzed again. This time a call from Mr. Crane. "Mr. Miller, I've introduced Miss Lopez to the children. She's requested to stay for dinner and put them to bed herself if that's acceptable." Lucas felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months. Hope, maybe, or just the fading ember of it. "She wants to stay?" "Yes, sir." "She seems remarkably composed." That evening, Lucas finally met Charlotte Lopez in person. He'd approved her hiring based on a desperate phone call from his staffing agency. "This is our last candidate, Mr. Miller. If she doesn't work out, we'll have to close your file." But he hadn't expected the woman who appeared in his study doorway at 7 o'clock. She was younger than he'd imagined, maybe late 20s, with dark eyes that held a quiet strength he recognized from somewhere he couldn't quite place. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself with a calmness that seemed almost unnatural given the circumstances. "Mr. Miller," she said, extending her hand. "I wanted to introduce myself properly. I'm Charlotte Lopez." Lucas shook her hand, studying her face for signs of the fear he'd seen in every other caregiver. "Miss Lopez, I assume Mr. Crane briefed you on the situation here." "He mentioned that previous caregivers have found the position challenging," Charlotte said carefully, "and that your daughters are still processing the loss of their mother." "That's a diplomatic way of putting it," Lucas said, his voice harder than he intended. "The tabloids prefer cursed and haunted." "I don't believe in curses, Mr. Miller." "Neither did I. But after 2 years of watching everyone who tries to help my daughters either run away screaming or end up dead." He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." "It was honest," Charlotte said quietly. "And I appreciate honesty." Lucas met her eyes. There was something different about this woman, a steadiness, a lack of judgment that he hadn't encountered in anyone else who'd crossed his threshold. "You're different," he said finally. "Most people can't even walk through that gate without trembling. Your daughters aren't what I'm worried about, Mr. Miller." The statement hung between them, loaded with implications Lucas wasn't sure he wanted to unpack. Before he could respond, Charlotte glanced at her watch. "I should get back to the girls. I promised them I'd read a bedtime story." She paused at the door. "Mr. Miller? When was the last time you had dinner with your daughters?" The question landed like a punch to the gut. Lucas couldn't remember. Weeks? Months? He'd been avoiding them, he realized with a sickening clarity. Avoiding their blank stares and their whispered conversations that excluded him. Avoiding the guilt that consumed him every time he looked at their faces and saw Rebecca's eyes staring back. "That's what I thought," Charlotte said softly. "Maybe tomorrow night you could join us?" She left before he could answer. That night, Charlotte lay in the bedroom that had been prepared for her on the second floor, far enough from the twins' room to give them privacy, close enough to hear if they called out. The mansion settled around her with creaks and groans that old houses make, but Charlotte had lived in enough foster homes to know the difference between ordinary nighttime sounds and something else. This felt like something else. She'd almost drifted off when she heard it, the soft whisper of her bedroom door opening. Charlotte kept her eyes closed, her breathing steady, every sense suddenly alert. Footsteps, light and careful, crossed her floor. 2 sets of them. They stopped at the foot of her bed. "Don't go into the West Wing." The voices spoke in perfect unison, a stereo whisper that raised goosebumps along Charlotte's arms. She recognized them, Evelyn and Abigail, speaking together the way they had at the piano. "Don't go into the West Wing," they repeated, more urgent this time. "Promise us." Charlotte's hand moved slowly toward the bedside lamp. She needed to see their faces, to understand what was happening. Her fingers found the switch. "Promise," the twins whispered. Charlotte turned on the light. The sudden brightness flooded the room, and for a split second she saw them clearly, Evelyn and Abigail standing at the foot of her bed in matching white nightgowns, their faces pale and frightened. But behind them, in the shadows near her door, something else stood. Someone else. A tall silhouette, perfectly still, watching. Charlotte's breath caught. She blinked, trying to focus. The light went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual fade. One moment the room was illuminated, the next it was plunged into absolute darkness so complete that Charlotte couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. She lunged for the lamp again, her heart hammering against her ribs, but the switch clicked uselessly. Dead. In the darkness she heard the twins' footsteps retreating, quick and quiet. The door closed with a soft click. And then, nothing. Just her own ragged breathing and the thunderous pulse of blood in her ears. Charlotte sat frozen in her bed, every instinct screaming that she wasn't alone. That the tall figure she'd glimpsed was still in her room, standing in the darkness, watching her with eyes she couldn't see. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. Her phone, she'd left it charging on the dresser across the room. She'd have to cross 15 feet of darkness to reach it. 15 feet where anything, anyone, could be waiting. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Charlotte counted her heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. Then, so close it could have been whispered directly into her ear, a voice spoke from the darkness. "You should have listened to them." Charlotte's hand shot out in the darkness, grabbing the heavy hardcover book from her nightstand. She swung it toward the voice with all her strength. It connected with nothing but air. She scrambled backward against the headboard, her other hand fumbling for anything she could use as a weapon. "Who's there?" Silence answered her. Long, stretching silence that made her skin crawl. Then, from somewhere far down the hallway, she heard it. The measured footsteps she'd heard earlier that day, calm and unhurried, fading into the distance. Charlotte didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat with her back against the headboard, the book clutched in her lap, watching the darkness gradually surrender to the gray light of dawn. When the sun finally rose, she examined her room with meticulous care. The lamp worked perfectly. The door showed no signs of being tampered with. And on her nightstand, placed carefully beside where her book had been, sat a single white rose, its petals still fresh, its stem still wet with dew. The same kind of rose she'd found outside the West Wing. Charlotte picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hands. Someone had been in her room. Someone real, not a ghost. Someone who wanted her to know they'd been there. The message was clear. "I can reach you whenever I want." She spent the morning settling into a routine with the twins, determined not to show the fear that had kept her awake all night. Evelyn and Abigail were polite but distant, answering her questions with monosyllables and avoiding eye contact. They ate breakfast in silence, pushed food around their plates, and returned to their synchronized piano playing as if Charlotte didn't exist. But Charlotte was good at reading children. She'd learned in foster care that the quietest kids were often the ones screaming the loudest on the inside. And these girls weren't just quiet, they were performing quiet, like actors playing a role they'd been forced to memorize. By mid-morning, Charlotte began her real work, investigating the mansion itself. She started small. The window in the twins' playroom, she distinctly remembered closing it the night before, concerned about the autumn chill. Now it stood wide open, curtains billowing in the breeze. She closed it again, this time checking the lock. It clicked firmly into place. In the hallway leading to the east wing, she caught a scent that made her stop. Perfume, delicate, expensive, with notes of jasmine and vanilla. It hung in the air like a ghost itself, too strong to be a lingering memory, too present to be imagination. Charlotte followed the scent. It led her down corridors lined with portraits of Miller family ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress. The smell grew stronger as she approached a junction where one hallway led to the twins' wing and another, blocked by velvet ropes and a private sign, led to the forbidden West Wing. The perfume was strongest here. Charlotte ducked under the ropes, her heart beating faster. The hallway beyond was darker, the windows covered with heavy curtains that blocked out the morning sun. Dust motes danced in the thin sliver of light that crept through gaps in the fabric. The air felt colder here, thick with disuse and something else, something that made the hair on Charlotte's arms stand up. She was halfway down the hall when she saw it. Someone had written on the gilded mirror hanging on the wall. The letters were crude, childlike, written in what looked like lipstick. She never fell. Charlotte's breath caught. She stepped closer, examining the message. The lipstick was fresh, she could still smell its waxy scent. Someone had written this recently. Very recently. Miss Lopez? Charlotte spun around to find Mr. Crane standing at the entrance to the West Wing, his expression perfectly neutral but his pale eyes sharp with something that might have been disapproval. "The West Wing is off limits to staff," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Mr. Miller's orders. Since his wife's accident, he prefers this section remain undisturbed." "I was following a scent," Charlotte said, keeping her voice steady. "Perfume. It led me here." "Old houses hold memories," Crane replied, moving closer with that same measured stride she'd heard in the darkness. "Sometimes we smell things that aren't really there. The mind plays tricks, especially in a place with such tragic history." Charlotte didn't move from her position. "Or someone is deliberately creating the illusion of hauntings." Something flickered in Crane's eyes, so quick she might have imagined it. "An interesting theory, Miss Lopez. But I assure you the staff here have no interest in such theatrics. We've all been quite traumatized by the unfortunate incidents." He extended his hand toward the hallway entrance, a clear dismissal. "Shall I escort you back to the main house? The twins will be expecting their lunch soon." Charlotte took one last look at the mirror message before following him. As they walked, she noticed the trail on the floor, a thin line of white granules barely visible against the marble. Salt. Someone had poured a line of salt along the threshold of the West Wing door. "Mr. Crane," she said carefully, "who cleans the West Wing?" "No one," he replied without looking back. "As I said, it remains undisturbed. Mr. Miller finds it too painful." "Then who wrote the message on the mirror?" Crane stopped walking. When he turned to face her, his expression was still perfectly polite, but there was something underneath now, something cold that reminded Charlotte of the voice in her dark room. "I suggest you focus on your duties with the children, Miss Lopez. The mansion's peculiarities are not your concern." Previous caregivers who became too curious about such things found the experience quite overwhelming. It wasn't quite a threat. But it wasn't quite not a threat either. That afternoon, Charlotte kept her distance from the West Wing but not from her observations. She noted which staff members avoided certain hallways. She watched how the maids crossed themselves when they passed the portrait of Rebecca Miller that hung in the main foyer. She listened to their whispered conversations in the kitchen. "It's her spirit," one maid murmured to another. "Mrs. Rebecca. She doesn't want anyone replacing her. That's why they all leave or, worse." "Did you hear about the window in Miss Lopez's room? Found it wide open this morning, even though she swears she locked it. Just like the others. It starts with small things, windows, moved objects, strange sounds. Then." The maid made a throat-cutting gesture. Charlotte pretended not to hear, but she filed every detail away. Ghost stories were useful. They revealed what people feared, and fear often pointed toward truth. By evening, she'd formed a hypothesis. Someone in this house wanted everyone to believe Rebecca Miller's ghost was haunting them. Someone was staging these incidents, the open windows, the perfume, the messages. The question was why, and more importantly, who. She was heading back to check on the twins when she heard voices from around the corner. She recognized Mr. Crane's smooth tone, but there was an edge to it now that hadn't been there during their earlier encounter. "I've told you before," Crane was saying, his voice low and controlled. "You do not speak to the new nanny. You do not tell her things. You do not trust her. Do you understand?" Charlotte pressed herself against the wall, peering carefully around the corner. Crane stood in the hallway with both twins, his hands gripping their shoulders. From Charlotte's angle, she could see his fingers pressing into their small frames, not quite bruising but close. Too tight. Too possessive. Evelyn's face was pale, her eyes downcast. Abigail had started crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she made no sound. Not even a whimper. "Answer me," Crane said, his voice still soft but laced with something dark. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Crane," the twins whispered in unison. "Good girls. Now go to your room and stay there until dinner. And remember," his grip tightened, making Abigail flinch, "what happens if you forget our agreement?" He released them, and the girls scurried away like frightened rabbits, their footsteps quick and desperate on the marble floor. Crane watched them go, his expression unreadable, before turning and walking in the opposite direction with that same measured, careful stride. Charlotte waited until he was gone before moving. Her hands were shaking, not from fear but from rage. She'd seen that kind of control before, in foster homes where appearances mattered more than truth. The soft voice, the too tight grip, the veiled threats. This wasn't discipline. This was manipulation. Fear-based compliance. And those girls had been living under it for 2 years. She waited an hour before checking on them, giving them time to calm down. Their room was at the end of the east wing, a large space decorated with expensive toys and perfect furniture that looked rarely touched. The twins sat together on a window seat, staring out at the garden below, the same garden where their mother had died. "Evelyn? Abigail?" Charlotte said softly from the doorway. "May I come in?" The girls didn't answer, but they didn't tell her to leave either. Charlotte took that as permission. She sat down in a chair near their art table, deliberately keeping distance between them. She'd learned that traumatized children needed space to feel safe. "I want you to know something," Charlotte said quietly. "Whatever Mr. Crane told you, whatever he said about me, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not afraid of him." Evelyn turned slightly, her eyes meeting Charlotte's for the first time with something other than emptiness. "You should be. Maybe. But I'm more concerned about you two than I am about being afraid." Abigail wiped her eyes. "He said you'd leave like all the others. He said we're cursed and that everyone who tries to help us dies. That's not a curse, sweetheart. That's a pattern. And patterns are made by people, not spirits." Charlotte let that sink in for a moment before standing. As she did, something on their art table caught her eye, a piece of paper partially hidden under a coloring book. She could see the edge of it covered in crayon marks. "What are you drawing these days?" she asked casually, moving closer. Both twins went rigid. "Nothing," Evelyn said quickly. "Just pictures." But Charlotte had already seen enough. She carefully moved the coloring book aside, revealing the drawing underneath. It was crude, rendered in the simple style of children, but unmistakable. A stick figure woman with yellow hair standing on what looked like a balcony. Behind her, a tall figure in black, arms extended, hands on the woman's back. Below the balcony, flowers and crosses that clearly represented a grave. And at the top of the page, in Abigail's careful handwriting, "What we saw." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. She looked at the twins, who were both crying now, their small bodies shaking with silent sobs. "You saw someone push your mother?" Charlotte whispered. Evelyn nodded, her face buried in her sister's shoulder. "Oh, who was it?" Abigail pointed a trembling finger at the tall figure in black. At the carefully drawn details Charlotte had initially missed. The neat bow tie, the silver buttons, the formal posture. "Mr. Crane." Charlotte's hands trembled as she carefully placed the drawing back on the art table. Her mind raced, trying to process what she'd just learned. The twins had witnessed their mother's murder. For 2 years they'd carried that secret, terrorized into silence by the very man who'd killed her. "Listen to me," Charlotte said, kneeling in front of them and taking their small hands in hers. "I need you both to be very brave. Can you do that?" Both girls nodded, tears still streaming down their faces. "What you just showed me, does Mr. Crane know you saw him that night?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "He found us hiding in Mama's closet. We'd heard her scream and came running. We saw everything through the crack in the door. He told us it was an accident," Abigail continued, her words tumbling out now like water breaking through a dam. "He said Mama slipped. But we saw his hands. We saw him push her. And then he said..." Evelyn's voice broke. "He said if we ever told anyone, Daddy would have an accident too. He said we were cursed and everyone we loved would die because of us. He said he was the only one keeping Daddy safe." Charlotte felt rage building in her chest, white-hot and barely controlled. "That's a lie. All of it. You're not cursed and your father is in danger because of Mr. Crane, not because of you. But all the nannies," Abigail started, "were killed by him. Not by you. Never by you." Charlotte squeezed their hands gently. "I need you to trust me now. Can you do that?" The twins looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "Sometimes Mama sings at night." Charlotte frowned. "What do you mean?" "We hear her lullaby," Abigail said. "The one she used to sing to us. It comes through the walls. But the song doesn't come from heaven," Evelyn added, her voice taking on an eerie, rehearsed quality. "It comes from the West Wing." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. "You hear your mother's voice?" Not her voice, Evelyn clarified. A recording. We think. Sometimes we hear other things too. Footsteps. Whispers. Like someone is always listening. Abigail pointed to the corner of their room near the ceiling. The vents. Sound travels through them. We learned that when we were little, before Mama died. We used to listen to her sing in other rooms. Charlotte stood and examined the vent the girl had indicated. It was an old-fashioned register, the kind connected to a central heating system that ran throughout the house. She'd seen systems like this in historical homes before. They were notorious for carrying sound between rooms. Have you told anyone else about hearing these things? Mr. Crane knows, Evelyn said. He's the one who told us it was Mama's ghost. He said she was angry at us for letting her die, that she wanted to punish anyone who tried to replace her. Charlotte's mind was working rapidly now, pieces clicking into place. The perfume in the hallways. The messages on mirrors. The haunting that had terrorized 17 caregivers before her. It wasn't supernatural at all. It was calculated. Deliberate. Someone, Mr. Crane, had been manufacturing a ghost story to keep everyone afraid, to keep the twins isolated and traumatized, to ensure no one ever got close enough to learn the truth. I need to check something, Charlotte said. Will you two be okay here for a little while? The twins nodded, though Abigail gripped her sister's hand tightly. Lock the door behind me, Charlotte instructed. Don't open it for anyone except me or your father. Understand? After she heard the lock click, Charlotte made her way through the mansion with new purpose. She needed to find the central location of the old monitoring system, if one existed. Old houses like this often had servant call systems, and if Mr. Crane was using the vents to create his ghost. She found what she was looking for in a small utility room off the kitchen. A room the staff probably walked past a dozen times a day without a second thought. Inside, mounted on the wall, was an antiquated intercom system, the kind installed in grand homes in the early 1900s. It connected to speaking tubes and vents throughout the house, originally designed so servants could be summoned from any room. But someone had updated it. New wiring snaked alongside the old brass pipes. Modern equipment, speakers, recording devices, a mixing board, had been integrated into the vintage system. Charlotte examined the setup with growing horror. This wasn't just for listening. This was for broadcasting. She found a tablet connected to the system, unlocked and displaying a control interface. With a few taps, she pulled up the recorded files. There were dozens, audio clips labeled by date and location. She pressed play on one marked West Wing Lullaby. Rebecca Miller's voice filled the small room, singing the same haunting melody Charlotte had heard the twins play on the piano. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, a mother's voice preserved forever, now being weaponized to terrorize her own children. Charlotte's hands clenched into fists. She took photos of everything with her phone, the equipment, the recordings, the labels. Evidence. She needed evidence if anyone was going to believe her. A sound behind her made Charlotte spin around, her heart leaping into her throat. But it was only Lucas Miller, standing in the doorway with an expression of complete confusion. Miss Lopez? What are you doing in here? Charlotte's mind raced. She couldn't tell him everything yet, not without proof he'd believe, not without making sure the twins were safe first. But she could start planting seeds. Mr. Miller, can we talk? Somewhere private. 20 minutes later they sat in Lucas's study, the door closed. Charlotte had insisted on checking the room first, examining the vents and corners before she would speak freely. Lucas watched her with growing concern. You're scaring me, Miss Lopez. Good, Charlotte said bluntly. You should be scared. Your daughters have been living in terror for 2 years, and I don't think you have any idea why. Lucas leaned forward, his face pale. Tell me. So Charlotte did, carefully, strategically. She told him about the drawings, about the twins' fear of Mr. Crane, about the monitoring system in the utility room. She didn't mention murder yet. She needed to see if he'd believe the smaller things first. Crane has been with my family since before the twins were born, Lucas said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. He was Rebecca's choice. She trusted him completely. Did she? Charlotte asked. Or did she start to question that trust before she died? Lucas went very still. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm just asking you to consider that things might not be as they seem in this house. That the curse everyone talks about might have a very human architect. Lucas stood and walked to his window, the same window where he'd stood the night before watching the city lights. Rebecca kept a journal, he said quietly. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to read it. Crane offered to pack away her things to spare me the pain. I let him. Charlotte's pulse quickened. Where did he put them? The West Wing. Everything is in the West Wing, her clothes, her books, her personal effects. I haven't been in there since. His voice broke. I can't. Every time I try, I see her falling and I... Mr. Miller, I need you to give me permission to enter the West Wing. Tonight. Lucas turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes she recognized, the desperate hope of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. You think there's something in there? Something that will explain what's been happening? I think there are answers in that wing. And I think someone has been very determined to make sure no one ever finds them. That night, after dinner, a quiet affair where the twins ate in tense silence and Mr. Crane served with his usual impeccable efficiency, Charlotte waited in her room. Lucas had given her a key to the West Wing, extracted from his safe despite Mr. Crane's polite protest that the wing was unstable and potentially dangerous. Charlotte lay in bed, fully dressed under the covers, watching the glowing numbers on her alarm clock crawl toward midnight. She'd learned from the twins that Mr. Crane retired to his quarters at 11:30 each night, like clockwork. She would give him an hour to settle before making her move. At 12:47 a.m. she heard it. The lullaby, drifting through the vents, soft and ethereal. Rebecca Miller's voice, singing to daughters who would never hear their mother's real voice again. Charlotte threw off her covers and moved silently into the hallway. The sound grew louder as she approached the West Wing, the melody both beautiful and profoundly wrong, a ghost manufactured by someone living. She reached the velvet ropes that marked the forbidden territory. The door beyond them was chained and padlocked, just as everyone had said. But Charlotte had Lucas's key. She was reaching for the padlock when she noticed something that made her freeze. On the floor directly in front of the door, sat a single white rose. Its petals were perfect, pristine. And when Charlotte touched it carefully with one finger, she found the stem still wet, fresh cut, like it had been placed there only moments ago. Which meant someone had been here. Recently. Someone who'd walked down this hallway while Charlotte was approaching. Someone who'd left this rose as a message or a warning or both. Charlotte looked down the dark corridor behind her. Empty. Silent. But somewhere in this house someone was watching. Someone who knew exactly what she was doing. And that someone had just let her know. They were always one step ahead. The lullaby continued to play, Rebecca's voice echoing through the empty hallway like a ghost calling her home. Charlotte picked up the rose, feeling its thorns press against her palm, and turned the key in the lock. The chain fell away with a soft rattle that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Charlotte pushed the door open and stepped into the West Wing. And somewhere in the darkness behind her, she swore she heard the measured sound of footsteps beginning to approach. Charlotte stepped into the West Wing, and the temperature dropped immediately. Not supernaturally, she recognized the practical cause. No heating, windows probably left open, air circulation cut off for 2 years. But the psychological effect was undeniable. This place felt frozen in time, preserved like a tomb. The lullaby was louder here, emanating from speakers hidden in the ceiling vents. Rebecca's voice surrounded Charlotte as she moved deeper into the wing, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. Dust covered everything. Furniture draped in white sheets, picture frames turned face down, a life interrupted and never resumed. She found Rebecca's bedroom at the end of the hall. The door stood ajar, revealing a space that was both luxurious and haunting. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, still made with silk sheets. A vanity held bottles of perfume, the jasmine and vanilla scent Charlotte had smelled in the hallways. And everywhere, photographs. Rebecca with the twins as babies, Rebecca and Lucas on their wedding day, Rebecca laughing in a garden full of roses. Charlotte moved methodically, searching for the journal Lucas had mentioned. She checked drawers, looked under the mattress, examined the closet where the twins had hidden the night they'd watched their mother die. But whoever had packed this room, Mr. Crane, had been thorough. Too thorough. Personal papers, diaries, anything that might contain Rebecca's private thoughts seemed to have been removed. She was about to give up when she noticed something odd. One of the framed photographs on the nightstand sat at a slight angle, as if recently disturbed. Charlotte picked it up, Rebecca holding the twins, all three of them smiling at the camera, and felt something shift inside the frame. Carefully she pried open the back. A piece of paper fell out, folded small and tucked behind the photograph. Charlotte's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, rushed. If anything happens to me, look at Crane. He's not what he seems. The girls aren't safe. The note ended abruptly, torn, as if Rebecca had been interrupted while writing it. Charlotte photographed the note with her phone, then carefully replaced it. Her heart was racing now, pieces clicking into place. Rebecca had known. She'd suspected Crane of something terrible enough to leave a hidden warning. But what had she discovered? And had that discovery gotten her killed? The lullaby cut off abruptly, plunging the wing into sudden silence. Charlotte froze, listening. The absence of sound was somehow worse than the manufactured haunting. In the quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat, her own breathing, and footsteps. Measured. Deliberate. Approaching from the hallway. Charlotte moved quickly but quietly, slipping out of Rebecca's bedroom and into an adjoining sitting room. She pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway, barely breathing as the footsteps passed by. Through the crack in the door, she caught a glimpse of a tall figure carrying something. A vase of fresh roses, white petals gleaming in the moonlight filtering through the windows. Mr. Crane. He moved through the west wing like he owned it, like he visited regularly. He entered Rebecca's bedroom, and Charlotte heard the soft sound of a vase being placed on a surface, water being poured. He was changing the flowers. In a room that was supposed to be sealed off and forgotten, he was maintaining a shrine. Charlotte waited until his footsteps retreated before she dared to move. She needed more than a note. She needed proof that would convince Lucas, that would stand up to Crane's inevitable denials. And there was only one place that proof might exist. Crane's private quarters. The next morning, Charlotte played her role perfectly. She was cheerful at breakfast, attentive with the twins, completely normal. Mr. Crane served coffee with his usual impeccable politeness, and Charlotte smiled at him like she suspected nothing. "Mr. Crane," she said casually, "I wanted to ask you about Mrs. Miller. The twins mentioned she used to sing to them. It might help if I understood more about her routines, her ways of comforting them." Crane's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his pale eyes. Mrs. Miller was a devoted mother. Perhaps too devoted. Too devoted? She had difficulty with boundaries, Crane said, setting down the coffee pot with precise care. The children consumed her every thought. Mr. Miller often worried about her intensity. Charlotte kept her voice light, conversational. "It must have been terrible for you finding her after the accident." "I didn't find her, Miss Lopez. The gardener did." Crane's smile was polite but somehow chilling. Mrs. Miller was delicate. The house was too much for her. The children. He paused, his eyes drifting to where the twins sat silently at the table. The children were too much. There it was, the subtle implication that Rebecca had been unstable, that her death was somehow inevitable, understandable. Charlotte recognized it as the same narrative Crane had probably fed to the police, to Lucas, to anyone who might have questioned the official story. "Well," Charlotte said, standing and gathering the breakfast dishes, "I appreciate you sharing that. It helps me understand what they've been through." She carried the dishes to the kitchen, feeling Crane's eyes following her the entire way. That afternoon, Charlotte learned that Mr. Crane had a standing appointment every Thursday at 2 o'clock. He went into town to collect specialty groceries for the household. The cook had mentioned it casually, complaining that he was too particular about where the food came from. At 1:55 p.m., Charlotte watched from an upstairs window as Crane's pristine black car pulled away from the estate. She'd have maybe 90 minutes. Maybe less if he returned early. She'd already located his quarters, a suite of rooms off the service hallway on the ground floor, away from the family spaces. Staff weren't supposed to enter without permission, but Charlotte had Lucas's authority if anyone questioned her. The door was locked, but Charlotte had learned to pick simple locks in foster care. A skill born of necessity when you needed to retrieve your belongings from rooms you weren't supposed to access. This lock surrendered in under a minute. Crane's quarters were immaculate. Obsessively so. Everything had its place, organized with military precision. The sitting room held antique furniture, leather-bound books arranged by height, and a small desk with nothing on its surface except a single fountain pen aligned perfectly parallel to the edge. Charlotte moved through the space quickly but carefully, taking photos of anything unusual. In the bedroom she found his closet, suits arranged by color, shirts pressed and hung with exact spacing between them. This level of control spoke to something deeper than mere tidiness. This was a man who needed to control every detail of his environment. The bathroom revealed more of the same. Toiletries arranged in perfect rows, towels folded with hospital corners, not a single item out of place. But it was what she found in his private study that made her blood run cold. The cabinet was locked. A serious lock, not the simple mechanism on his door. Charlotte almost gave up, but then she noticed the edge of a photograph sticking out from where the cabinet door didn't quite meet the frame. Someone had been careless just once. She worked at it carefully with a letter opener from the desk, finally managing to hook the edge of the photo and pull it free. Rebecca Miller, photographed through a window. She was reading to the twins, unaware she was being watched. The angle suggested the photo had been taken from outside the house, from someone hiding in the garden. Charlotte's hands shook as she realized what she was looking at. She pulled harder at the stuck photograph, and suddenly several more came loose, cascading onto the floor. Rebecca sleeping. Rebecca in her garden. Rebecca playing with the girls. Dozens of photos, maybe hundreds, all taken without her knowledge. A surveillance record spanning what looked like years. And then Charlotte found the one that stopped her heart. Rebecca on the West Wing balcony, her face twisted in terror, her mouth open in a scream. A man's hand visible in the frame, gripping her wrist, pulling her toward the railing. The image was blurred, captured in motion, but unmistakable in its horror. This wasn't a photo taken after the fact. This was taken during the murder. Which meant someone else had been there. Someone who documented Rebecca's death as it happened. Charlotte's mind reeled as she stared at the photo's angle, the perspective. This had been taken from inside the room. From a camera on a timer, or... She looked closer at the photograph's edge and saw it, the reflection in the French door's glass. A camera on a tripod. This hadn't been a casual snapshot. This had been planned, set up, deliberate. Mr. Crane hadn't just killed Rebecca Miller. He documented it. Preserved it like one of his collected memories. Charlotte fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, snapping photos of everything. She needed to get these to Lucas, to the police, to... A hand clamped down on her shoulder from behind. Charlotte's scream caught in her throat as she was spun around. Mr. Crane stood in the doorway of his study, his expression still perfectly polite but his eyes absolutely dead. "I returned early," he said conversationally as if discussing the weather. "The market had run out of the particular herbs I needed. Unfortunate timing for you, Miss Lopez." Charlotte tried to pull away but his grip tightened painfully. Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. "I really had hoped you would last longer than the others," Crane continued, his voice soft, almost regretful. "You seemed more intelligent. More careful. But curiosity kills more than cats, Miss Lopez." He reached down and picked up one of the fallen photographs, the one of Rebecca screaming. He looked at it with something that might have been fondness. "She was perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. And he didn't deserve her. None of them did. The caregivers who came after, trying to replace her, thinking they could just step into her place." His pale eyes fixed on Charlotte. "Thinking they could heal those girls, take them away from me? The twins aren't yours," Charlotte managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "They're all I have left of her," Crane said. "And I won't let anyone take them. Not you. Not anyone." His hand moved to his jacket pocket, and Charlotte saw the glint of something metallic. A syringe. "The others fought," he said almost sadly. "It made things so messy. But you seem intelligent enough to understand that fighting will only make this harder. This will be quick, painless. An unfortunate accident, just like all the others." Charlotte's mind raced. The phone on the floor, had she managed to send anything before he grabbed her? Were the photos uploaded to the cloud? She couldn't remember, couldn't think past the terror freezing her limbs. Crane stepped closer, the syringe emerging fully from his pocket now. Clear liquid gleamed in its barrel. "The twins will miss you for a day or two," he said. "But they'll forget like they always do. Children are remarkably resilient when properly guided." "They won't forget," Charlotte said, her voice finding strength from somewhere deep inside. "They remember everything, Mr. Crane. Including the night you murdered their mother." For the first time, Crane's perfect mask cracked. His grip loosened just slightly in shock. And Charlotte ran. Charlotte didn't remember how she made it out of Crane's quarters. Her body moved on pure instinct, ducking under his reaching arm, shoving past him into the hallway, her feet pounding against the marble floors as she ran. Behind her, she heard no pursuit. No running footsteps. Just that same measured, deliberate walk, as if Crane knew she had nowhere to go. Because he was right. Where could she run? To Lucas, who barely knew her? To the police, with nothing but photographs on a phone she dropped in Crane's study? She had no proof now. Just her word against a man who'd served the Miller family for decades. Charlotte made it to her room and locked the door, her chest heaving, her hands shaking so violently she could barely turn the bolt. She pressed her back against the door and slid down to the floor, forcing herself to think. Crane hadn't chased her. Hadn't raised an alarm. Which meant he was confident that no one would believe her, confident that he'd covered his tracks, confident that he could make her disappear just like all the others when the time was right. She had to be smarter. Calmer. She had to pretend nothing had happened until she could figure out her next move. By dinner time, Charlotte had rebuilt her mask. She came down to the dining room with steady hands and a neutral expression, helping the twins with their meal as if the afternoon's terror had never occurred. Mr. Crane served the food with his usual efficiency, meeting her eyes once across the table with a look that said everything. You can run, but I control this house. Lucas wasn't at dinner, working late again according to Crane. The twins ate in silence, occasionally glancing at Charlotte with worried eyes. After the meal, Charlotte accompanied them to their room for bedtime. Once the door was closed and locked, Evelyn grabbed her hand. We heard you running, she whispered. In the hallways. We heard him walking after you. Did he hurt you? Abigail asked, her small face pale with fear. Charlotte knelt down between them. No, I'm okay. But I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be completely honest. Does Mr. Crane come to your room at night? The twins exchanged one of their silent looks. Finally, Evelyn nodded. He stands outside our door, she said. We can see his shadow under the crack. Sometimes he whispers through it. What does he say? Abigail's voice dropped to barely audible. He says he's protecting us from bad women. Women who want to take us away from Mama's memory. He says Mama's spirit is angry, that she watches from heaven and sees everyone who tries to replace her. He says if we let anyone get close, Mama will be disappointed in us, Evelyn added. That she'll stop loving us. Charlotte felt her heart break for these children who'd spent 2 years being psychologically tortured by their mother's killer. Your mother loved you more than anything. And she would want you to be happy, to be safe, to let people care about you. But the nannies all died, Abigail whispered. Or left. Because of us. No. Because of him. Mr. Crane has been making you think you're cursed, but you're not. He's the one who's been hurting people. He's the one you should be afraid of, not your mother's ghost. The twins looked at each other again, and Charlotte saw something shift in their expressions. Hope, maybe, or the first flicker of rebellion. Will you tell Daddy? Evelyn asked. I'm going to try. But I need proof first. Real proof that he'll believe. What Charlotte didn't know was that at that very moment, in Lucas's study 3 floors below, Mr. Crane was planting the seeds of doubt that would nearly destroy everything. The next morning, Lucas summoned Charlotte to his office. His face was drawn, exhausted, and when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Suspicion. Miss Lopez, I need to ask you about something. He turned his computer monitor toward her. This is security footage from last night. The West Wing. Charlotte's stomach dropped as she watched grainy video of herself entering the forbidden wing, moving through the rooms, clearly searching for something. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., hours after her actual visit. I gave you permission to enter the West Wing, Lucas said slowly. But this footage concerns me. You were in there for nearly 2 hours. In my late wife's bedroom. Going through her things. That's not, Charlotte started then stopped. The footage showed her doing exactly what she had done, but the timestamp was wrong. Crane must have edited it, changed the time to make it look like she'd been sneaking around in the middle of the night instead of with Lucas's explicit permission. Mr. Crane brought this to my attention this morning, Lucas continued. He's concerned about your stability. He mentioned you were asking unusual questions about Rebecca, that you seemed obsessed with her death. Charlotte felt the trap closing around her. Mr. Miller, that footage has been manipulated. I was in the West Wing, yes, but... He also mentioned finding you in his private quarters yesterday afternoon. Going through his personal belongings. The way Lucas said it made it sound sordid, invasive. Not like she'd been searching for evidence of murder. I can explain. Miss Lopez, I'm grateful for your dedication to my daughters. But I'm concerned that you may be projecting something onto this situation. Getting caught up in the ghost stories and rumors. Perhaps the stress of the position is too much. Charlotte recognized what was happening. Crane was doing to her what he'd probably done to Rebecca. Making her seem unstable, paranoid, unreliable. By the time she accused him of anything, no one would believe her. The twins, she said desperately. Ask them. They'll tell you. The twins barely speak to anyone including me, Lucas interrupted. And Mr. Crane mentioned that you've been encouraging them to be suspicious of him, telling them disturbing things about their mother's death. Because it's true. Your wife didn't fall, Mr. Miller. She was pushed. The twins saw it happen, and Crane has been terrorizing them into silence for 2 years. The words hung in the air between them. Lucas's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, anger, and finally, pity. I think you need to take a step back, he said quietly. Stay away from the children for a few days. Get some rest. If you continue to make these kinds of accusations, I'll have no choice but to... To what? Fire me? Let me become Crane's next victim? Charlotte's voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. Ask yourself why 17 caregivers couldn't handle this job, Mr. Miller. Ask yourself why 2 people are dead. It's not a curse. It's not your daughters. It's him. But she could see in Lucas's eyes that she'd already lost. Crane had been too thorough, too careful. Without her phone, without the photographs, she had nothing but the word of 2 traumatized children against a trusted employee of decades. Take the rest of the day, Lucas said, his voice final. I'll have someone else handle the twins' care for now. Charlotte left the office feeling hollow. She'd been outmaneuvered by a man who'd had years to perfect his manipulation. But she wasn't done. She couldn't be done, not with those girls still in danger. That evening, Charlotte made a decision. If she couldn't convince Lucas with words, she'd get proof he couldn't deny. She had one advantage. Crane thought he'd won. He'd think she would back off now, lick her wounds, maybe even quit like so many others before her. He was wrong. Charlotte had learned to survive in foster homes. She waited until the household settled into its nighttime routine. Then she retrieved something she'd brought with her from her apartment. A small digital recorder, the kind she'd used years ago to document abuse in a foster home. She'd kept it as insurance, never knowing when she might need proof that people wouldn't otherwise believe. Moving through the dark hallways, Charlotte made her way to Crane's study. The door was locked, but she'd expected that. What Crane didn't know was that she'd jimmied the window latch earlier that day, making it look secure while actually leaving it accessible from the outside. She climbed through the window, careful and quiet, and placed the recorder behind a stack of books on the shelf, positioned so the microphone faced Crane's desk. She activated the voice detection feature, which would start recording automatically when someone spoke. Then she climbed back out and returned to her room, her heart pounding but her resolve hardened. For 3 days, Charlotte maintained her distance from the twins per Lucas's orders. She saw them occasionally in the hallways, their sad eyes following her. She saw Crane's satisfied smirk every time he passed her. And she waited, checking the recorder's remote app on her tablet, watching for activity. On the 3rd night at 11:34 p.m., the app showed a recording in progress. Charlotte's hands trembled as she pulled up the audio file, listening through headphones in the darkness of her room. At first, there was just the sound of Crane moving around his study, papers rustling, a drawer opening and closing. Then his voice, speaking to himself in a tone Charlotte had never heard before, not the polite butler's voice but something softer, more intimate, almost loving. 2 years since you left me, Rebecca. 2 years of watching these usurpers try to take your place. But I keep them away. I keep the girls safe just for you. Pause. More movement. This one is more persistent than the others. She looks like you, did I mention that? Same dark eyes. Same way of tilting her head when she's thinking. She looked like Rebecca the moment she walked in. Maybe that's why I chose her. Charlotte's blood ran cold. He'd chosen her. This wasn't random. He'd been tracking her, selecting her, the same way he'd probably selected the others. But she's getting too close, Crane continued, his voice darkening. She found the photographs. She's turning the girls against me. I can't have that. They're all I have left of you, my darling. The only thing in this world that still carries your essence. The recording continued, Crane's monologue growing more disturbing with every word. He talked about Rebecca as if she'd been his, not Lucas's. He detailed his plans for Charlotte. An accident, staged to look like she'd wandered into the West Wing at night and fallen from the same balcony where Rebecca died. Poetic, he called it. Fitting. And then, in a moment that made Charlotte's hands shake so hard she almost dropped the tablet, Crane said something that changed everything. Lucas will never know. He's too broken, too guilty. He blames himself for not being there that night. If only he knew, if only he understood that Rebecca was finally going to be mine, after all those years of serving him, of watching him touch what should have been mine. But she rejected me. Threatened to fire me, to tell Lucas about my devotion. So I made a choice. If I couldn't have her, neither could he. A laugh soft and chilling. And now her daughters will learn what their mother never did, that I am the only one who truly loved her. The only one who truly loves them. The recording ended. Charlotte sat in the darkness, clutching the tablet, every hair on her body standing on end. She finally had it. Proof. A confession. Everything Lucas would need to believe her. But as she reached for her door to go wake Lucas immediately, she heard something that stopped her cold. Footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Measured. Deliberate. Stopping directly outside her door. And then Crane's voice, soft and conversational, speaking through the wood. I know you were listening, Charlotte. I know you heard everything. But it doesn't matter. No one will ever hear that recording. A soft click, the sound of her door being unlocked from the outside. Because you're not going to live long enough to share it. Charlotte's mind raced through her options in the seconds it took for her door handle to turn. She couldn't fight Crane directly. He was taller, stronger, and clearly prepared for violence. But she had one advantage. She'd been preparing for this moment since she'd planted the recorder. She grabbed her tablet, threw open her window, and climbed onto the narrow ledge that ran along the second floor of the mansion. The stone was cold and slick under her bare feet, but she moved quickly, edging along until she reached the drain pipe she'd identified days ago as an emergency escape route. Behind her, she heard Crane enter her room. Heard his soft curse when he found it empty. Charlotte slid down the drain pipe, scraping her palms, and hit the ground running. She had to get to Lucas. Had to make him listen before Crane could intercept her, manipulate the situation, make her look unstable again. Lucas's study light was still on. He often worked late into the night, drowning his grief in corporate documents. Charlotte burst through the front door, her appearance wild, barefoot, hair disheveled, eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Miller," she shouted, running through the foyer. "Lucas, I need you to listen to me right now." Lucas emerged from his study, alarmed. "Miss Lopez, what?" "No time," Charlotte gasped, pulling up the recording on her tablet. "You need to hear this. All of it." And then Crane's voice filled the hallway, speaking his confession into the darkness. Lucas's face went from confusion to horror to something beyond comprehension as he heard his trusted butler, the man who'd been with their family for decades, confess to murdering his wife. "This can't be," Lucas whispered. "This is some kind of trick, It's real," Charlotte said urgently. "The twins saw him do it. He's been terrorizing them for 2 years, making them think they're cursed. And he's killed every caregiver who got close to discovering the truth. I'm next, Mr. Miller. Right now, tonight, I'm next unless you." The lights went out. Every light in the mansion died simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly it rattled the windows. A storm Charlotte hadn't even noticed gathering now unleashed itself on the estate, rain hammering against the glass like fists demanding entry. "The backup generator should kick in," Lucas said, his voice tight with tension. "Just give it a few seconds." But the seconds stretched into a minute, and the darkness remained complete except for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the mansion in stark, horrifying snapshots. "He's cut the power," Charlotte said. He knows. He knows I have the recording." Lucas pulled out his phone, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "No signal. How is there no signal?" "He's thought of everything," Charlotte realized with growing dread. "He's been planning this. Probably has been since the moment I found those photographs." A sound echoed through the mansion, a child's scream, high and terrified, coming from somewhere above them. "The twins?" Lucas moved toward the stairs, but Charlotte grabbed his arm. "Wait. Could be a trap. He's been using recordings, remember? The lullaby, the sounds in the walls." Another scream, this one more desperate. "Daddy? Help us. Please." It was Abigail's voice and it sounded real. Lucas pulled away from Charlotte. "I don't care if it's a trap. Those are my daughters." He ran for the stairs and Charlotte had no choice but to follow, using her phone's flashlight to navigate the darkness. They climbed to the second floor, following the screams that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Where are they?" Lucas shouted. "Evelyn. Abigail. Daddy." The voice came from down the hallway now, toward the west wing. "We're in Mama's room. We're scared. The door is locked." Lucas ran toward the forbidden wing, Charlotte close behind. In the lightning flashes she saw his face, pure terror, a father's worst nightmare unfolding. "Mr. Miller, please," Charlotte tried one more time. "Think about this. Why would they be in the West Wing? How would they even get in there?" But Lucas wasn't listening. He'd reached the chain door and was fumbling with his keys, hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the lock. The chain fell away. Lucas threw open the door. "Girls? Where are you?" Silence answered him. No more screams. No crying children. Charlotte's instincts screamed danger, but she couldn't let Lucas go in alone. They moved together into the West Wing, their phone lights cutting weak paths through the darkness. And that's when Charlotte saw it. The hallway that had been dusty and abandoned just days ago was now transformed. Candles, dozens of them, lined the corridor, their flames dancing in the draft from the storm. Fresh roses covered every surface, their sickly sweet scent overwhelming. And at the end of the hall, Rebecca's portrait had been removed from the wall and placed on an easel, surrounded by wilted flowers and... Charlotte's stomach turned. Blood-stained ribbons. Hair ribbons, she realized. The same kind the twins wore. Some looked old, faded. But one was fresh, its red stain still wet. "What is this?" Lucas breathed, his voice breaking. "What is this?" "It's a shrine," Charlotte said quietly. "He's been maintaining it. Coming here in secret, worshipping her memory." A soft sound made them both spin around. The door behind them had closed, and standing in front of it, illuminated by candlelight, was Mr. Crane. He held a knife, long, serrated, gleaming in the flickering light. His usual composed expression had shattered, replaced by something raw and desperate and completely mad. "You weren't supposed to bring him," Crane said, his voice tight with anger. "This was meant to be between us, Charlotte. You and me. The way it was with Rebecca." "Crane," Lucas said, his voice shaking. "Tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't." "Didn't what? Love her?" Crane's laugh was bitter. "I loved her more than you ever could. I saw her first, you know. Before you came along with your money and your promises. I was there when she needed someone, when her family abandoned her. I helped her get the job that introduced her to you. And how did she repay me? By falling in love with a man who couldn't even be bothered to protect her." "You killed my wife," Lucas said, the words coming out strangled. "I freed her," Crane corrected. "From a loveless marriage, from the burden of children she couldn't properly care for, from the guilt of not loving me back. She was going to fire me, Lucas. Did you know that? She'd figured out that I loved her, and instead of being honored, she was disgusted. She threatened to tell you, to have me arrested for..." She used the word stalking. As if devotion could be a crime. Charlotte edged sideways, trying to position herself between Lucas and Crane, trying to think of any way out of this. "So you pushed her," Lucas said, his face twisted with anguish. "You murdered her." "I preserved her at her most perfect moment," Crane replied, his voice taking on an almost dreamy quality. "Before age could dim her beauty. Before disappointment could harden her heart further. She'll be young and perfect forever now, in my memory, in this shrine. And I've protected that perfection by removing every woman who tried to replace her." He turned his attention to Charlotte, the knife shifting in his grip. "But you," he said softly. "You were special. You looked so much like her. Same eyes. Same way of moving. I thought perhaps you could understand. Perhaps you could take her place, not as mother to the children but as mine." "You're insane," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite her terror. "I'm devoted," Crane corrected. "And every nanny who came before you had to die because they were replacements. Inferior copies. But you..." He stepped closer. "You could have been perfect. You could have understood. But you chose to betray me instead. To turn the children against me. To destroy everything I've built." Lucas moved suddenly, lunging toward Crane, but the butler was ready. He sidestepped smoothly, the knife flashing. Lucas cried out, clutching his arm where blood now seeped through his shirt. "Don't be a hero," Crane said almost sadly. "You failed at it before. The night Rebecca died you were working. Always working. If you'd been there, maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity. But you left her alone with me and she finally told me the truth, that she'd never loved me, that she pitied me. Do you know what pity does to devotion? It turns it into something else entirely." Charlotte helped Lucas back, applying pressure to his wound. It wasn't deep, but it was bleeding freely. They needed to get out, but Crane stood between them and the door. "You can't fix what was perfect," Crane continued, moving toward them with the knife raised. "You can only preserve it. And I've preserved Rebecca's memory, her legacy, her..." Music suddenly filled the West Wing. Not Rebecca's lullaby this time. The twins' voices singing together, their young voices clear and strong through the intercom system. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." Crane froze, confusion crossing his face. "How I wonder what you are." It was the song Rebecca had taught them but changed. The twins were singing new words now, words Charlotte had taught them in their secret planning sessions over the past 3 days. "We're not scared anymore, not afraid of you. Mama's watching from above and she knows the truth." Crane's face went white. No, they wouldn't. I told them. Up above the world so high like a diamond in the sky. The lights came back on with a sudden shocking brightness. And through the intercom speakers, Evelyn's voice spoke clearly. "The police are coming, Mr. Crane. Charlotte showed us how to call them. We told them everything." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Crane's careful mask shattered completely. He looked at Charlotte with pure hatred. "You turned them against me. You poisoned them. They were mine." "They were never yours," Charlotte said firmly. They're their fathers. And their mothers. And their own. But never yours. Crane screamed, an inarticulate sound of rage and loss, and lunged toward Charlotte with the knife. But Charlotte was ready. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this moment, planning with the twins, setting up recordings, teaching 2 terrified girls how to be brave. She sidestepped his attack, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling past her. Directly toward the open French doors of the balcony, the same balcony where Rebecca had died. No! Lucas shouted, reaching out, but it was too late. Crane's feet hit the threshold, his arms windmilled, and for one frozen moment, he teetered on the edge, his eyes wide with the same terror Rebecca must have felt. Charlotte's calm voice cut through the storm. "You don't run from ghosts, Mr. Crane. You join them." And he fell. The silence after Crane's scream faded was deafening. Even the storm seemed to pause, holding its breath. Charlotte stood frozen at the balcony threshold, staring down into the darkness where Crane had disappeared into the garden below, the same garden where Rebecca's body had been found 2 years ago. Lucas stumbled to the balcony railing, looking down, his face a mask of shock and horror and something that might have been relief. "Is he?" Lucas couldn't finish the sentence. Charlotte didn't answer. She was already moving, running back through the west wing toward the main house. The twins. She needed to see the twins, needed to make sure they were safe, that this nightmare was truly over. She found them exactly where she'd told them to stay, locked in Lucas's study with his phone, the emergency line still connected. They were huddled together on the leather couch, holding each other, their faces pale but their eyes different, clear. No longer haunted by secrets and terror. "Charlotte." Abigail broke away and ran to her, Evelyn close behind. Both girls crashed into Charlotte's arms, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the Miller mansion, they cried. Not silent, terrified tears, but the loud, gasping sobs of children finally allowed to release years of pent-up fear. "Is he gone?" Evelyn whispered against Charlotte's shoulder. "Is he really gone?" "He's gone," Charlotte confirmed, holding them tight. "He can't hurt you anymore. He can't hurt anyone anymore." The sound of sirens grew louder, multiple vehicles screaming up the long driveway. Red and blue lights painted the mansion's windows in alternating colors. Charlotte heard footsteps, voices, the organized chaos of first responders flooding into the house. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his injured arm hastily bandaged with a torn piece of fabric. His eyes found his daughter's, and something in his face broke open. 2 years of distance, of guilt, of not knowing how to reach them, all crumbling in an instant. "Evelyn." "Abigail," he said, his voice cracking. The twins looked at their father, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in years. Then they released Charlotte and ran to him. Lucas dropped to his knees, pulling them close with his good arm, his body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have known. I should have." "We were scared to tell you," Evelyn said, her small voice muffled against his chest. "Mr. Crane said you would die too if we told. Like Mama." "He said we were cursed," Abigail added. "That everyone who loved us would die." Lucas pulled back just enough to look at their faces, his own streaked with tears. "You're not cursed. You were never cursed. And I'm not going anywhere. I promise you I'm not going anywhere." A police officer appeared at the door, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Miller? We need to secure the scene. Is everyone here safe?" "Yes," Lucas said, though his eyes moved to Charlotte. "Thanks to Miss Lopez." The next hours passed in a blur of statements and questions. Paramedics arrived to treat Lucas's arm wound, shallow but requiring stitches. They also insisted on checking Charlotte and the twins, though none of them had any physical injuries. The physical ones anyway. Detective Sarah Chen took Charlotte's statement in Lucas's study while crime scene techs processed the West Wing. Charlotte told her everything, about finding the twins' drawing, discovering Rebecca's hidden note, the surveillance system Crane had used to terrorize the household, the photographs in his quarters documenting his obsession. "The recording you mentioned," Detective Chen said, making notes. "We'll need that as evidence." Charlotte handed over her tablet, relieved she'd backed up everything to the cloud. "It's all there. His confession. Everything you need." "And the fall?" "Walk me through exactly what happened." Charlotte met the detective's eyes steadily. Crane attacked Mr. Miller with a knife. He was cornered, desperate. He'd just confessed to murdering Rebecca Miller and at least 2 other women who worked in this house. When he realized the twins had called the police, that his carefully constructed lies were falling apart, he became violent. In the struggle, he lost his balance and fell from the same balcony where he'd pushed Mrs. Miller 2 years ago. It was the truth. Most of it. Charlotte didn't mention how she'd sidestepped his lunge, how she'd used his momentum against him. Didn't mention the satisfaction she'd felt watching him fall. Some truths were better left unspoken. Detective Chin studied her for a long moment. 17 caregivers before you either quit or died. What made you different? Charlotte thought about her sister, dying in that foster home fire while Charlotte had been powerless to save her. Thought about every child she'd worked with since, trying to give them the protection she couldn't give her sister. I know what it's like to be a child that no one believes, she said quietly. And I promised myself I'd never be one of the adults who looks away. By the time the police finished their preliminary investigation, dawn was breaking over the Miller estate. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and eerily peaceful. Charlotte stood at the window of her room, the room she'd slept in for less than a week but which felt like a lifetime, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. She was packing her few belongings when she heard the knock at her door. Lucas stood in the hallway, his arm in a proper sling now, his face exhausted but somehow lighter than she'd ever seen it. The detective said you're free to go, he said. But I'm hoping you won't. Charlotte paused in her packing. Mr. Miller? Lucas, please. After everything that's happened, I think we can use first names. Charlotte managed a small smile. Lucas then. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to stay. The twins have been through so much trauma. They need proper therapy, stability, time to heal with their father. Not a nanny who saved their lives, Lucas interrupted. Who believed them when I didn't? Who saw what was happening in my own house while I was too blind and broken to notice? He stepped into the room, his expression earnest. Charlotte, I failed my daughters. For 2 years, I let grief and guilt keep me distant from them. I let a monster manipulate all of us. But you saw the truth. You fought for them. Any decent person would have. No, Lucas said firmly. 17 people before you either ran away or died trying. You're different. The twins trust you. And more than that, they need you. Not as just a nanny. He struggled for the right words. As someone who helped them survive the unsurvivable. Someone who understands trauma because you've lived it too. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. I can't replace their mother. I'm not asking you to. Rebecca was irreplaceable. But the girls need support, guidance, someone who understands what they've been through. And I need. Lucas's voice cracked slightly. I need help learning how to be their father again. I need someone who won't let me hide in my work and avoid the hard conversations. Someone who'll call me out when I'm failing them. That sounds less like a nanny and more like a co-parent, Charlotte said, half joking. Lucas smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. Maybe it is. I'm not asking for anything romantic. Not now, probably not ever. But I am asking you to stay. To be part of this family's healing. If you want to. Before Charlotte could answer, 2 small voices came from the doorway. Please stay, Evelyn said. We don't want you to leave, Abigail added. The twins stood hand in hand, still in their pajamas, their faces hopeful in a way Charlotte had never seen before. Not the eerie, synchronized hope of children performing. Real hope. Individual. Different. Charlotte looked at the 3 of them, this broken family trying to piece itself back together, and thought about her sister. About all the children she'd tried to save over the years. About the chance to actually see this through, to help these girls heal instead of just moving on to the next crisis. Okay, she said softly. I'll stay. The twins rushed forward, hugging her again, and Lucas's smile widened. They stood there in the morning light streaming through the window, for people who'd survived a nightmare together, beginning the long process of learning to live again. But even as Charlotte held the girls, even as she felt the first stirrings of something like peace, she couldn't shake the image of Crane falling, his scream echoing into the storm. She'd killed a man. Self-defense, justified, necessary, but still. She'd taken a life. As if reading her thoughts, Lucas spoke quietly over the twins' heads. What you did, Charlotte, you saved us all. Don't ever doubt that. Charlotte nodded, but she felt something warm spreading across her side. She looked down and saw red seeping through her shirt. Charlotte. Lucas's voice seemed to come from very far away. Charlotte, are you? The room tilted. Charlotte realized with detached surprise that Crane had gotten her after all. In the struggle, in the chaos, the knife must have. She touched her side, her hand coming away red. How had she not noticed? The adrenaline maybe. The shock. Call an ambulance, Lucas was shouting, lowering Charlotte carefully to the floor. "Girls, run downstairs and get help. Now." The twins' faces swam above her, frightened again, and Charlotte wanted to tell them it was okay, that she'd be fine, but the words wouldn't come. The sunlight streaming through the window was so bright, so warm. She could hear sirens in the distance again, or maybe that was just the ringing in her ears. Her last thought before the darkness took her was a whisper, half prayer, half statement. "It's over." And then there was nothing but silence. Charlotte woke to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of medical equipment. Her side throbbed with a deep, burning ache that told her she was alive before her eyes could focus on the hospital room's white ceiling. "She's awake." A small voice, Abigail's, called out with relief. Charlotte turned her head, wincing at the movement, and found herself looking at 3 faces gathered around her bed. Lucas sat in the chair closest to her, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. The twins stood on either side of him, their hands clasped together, their expressions anxious but hopeful. "How long?" Charlotte's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. 3 days, Lucas said, leaning forward. "The knife wound was deeper than anyone realized. You lost a lot of blood. The doctors said if we'd waited even 10 minutes longer to get you help." He didn't finish the sentence, but Charlotte understood. "Crane?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Dead. Instantly from the fall." Lucas's voice was steady, but Charlotte could see the complexity of emotions in his eyes. Relief, guilt, grief for the man he'd thought he knew. The police investigation confirmed everything. The recordings, the photographs in his quarters, the evidence of how he'd manipulated the security systems. "It's over, Charlotte. It's really over." Evelyn stepped closer, her small hand reaching out to touch Charlotte's. "We were so scared. We thought you were going to die like Mama." "But you didn't," Abigail added quickly, as if saying it out loud would make it more true. "You're strong. Like you promised." Charlotte managed a weak smile, squeezing Evelyn's hand gently. "Takes more than a knife wound to get rid of me." Over the next 2 weeks, Charlotte healed in a private room that Lucas had insisted on. The best care money could buy, though Charlotte would have been fine with the standard ward. The twins visited daily, bringing drawings they'd made, telling her stories about the therapist they'd started seeing, gradually opening up about things they'd kept buried for 2 years. Lucas came too, sometimes with the girls, sometimes alone. He told her about the police findings, the full extent of Crane's obsession revealed in a hidden room behind his quarters. Hundreds of photographs of Rebecca spanning years, voice recordings he'd made of her without her knowledge, and most chilling of all, a journal. "The detective let me read parts of it," Lucas said one afternoon, his voice heavy. "It goes back 15 years. Long before Rebecca and I even met. He saw her at a charity event where she was serving and he, fixated on her. Helped her get a job as an event coordinator at my company, which is how I met her. He orchestrated our introduction, thinking he was setting her up for success, but when she fell in love with me instead." Lucas shook his head. "The journal gets darker after our wedding. He wrote about watching us, listening through the vents, documenting our lives like he was collecting evidence for something." "And the murders?" Charlotte asked quietly. "All documented. Martha, the housekeeper, he drugged her, then staged the fall. Sophia, the nanny, he tampered with the shed heater, sealed the vents. Every death meticulously planned and recorded, like he was proud of it." Lucas's hands clenched into fists. "And the final entries were about you. Pages and pages written before you even arrived. He'd been tracking you for months, Charlotte. He knew about your sister, your background in foster care, your history of protecting children. He chose you specifically." Charlotte felt ice slide down her spine. "Why me?" "Because you looked like Rebecca. Because you had the strength he knew would eventually threaten him. He wrote that he wanted to recreate Rebecca's death. That killing you would be like killing her again, but this time he could control every detail." Lucas's voice shook with anger and guilt. "I'm so sorry. I brought you into this house, into his trap, and I didn't believe you when you tried to warn me." "You were manipulated by someone you trusted," Charlotte said firmly. "That's not your fault. Crane spent years perfecting his deceptions. But I should have." "Should have what?" "Read minds? Seen through a mask that fooled everyone for over a decade?" Charlotte shook her head. "Lucas, you were grieving. You were trying to survive while raising 2 traumatized children alone. Crane took advantage of that. He's the monster here, not you." When Charlotte was finally discharged from the hospital 4 weeks after that terrible night, she expected to return to her tiny apartment, to resume her job search, to move on to the next family who needed help. She didn't expect Lucas to be waiting outside her hospital room with the twins, all three of them wearing matching nervous expressions. "We have a proposition," Lucas said as they walked to his car. "And before you say anything, I want you to know there's no pressure. If you want to leave to never see this family again after what we put you through, I would completely understand." Charlotte stopped walking. "What kind of proposition?" Evelyn and Abigail looked at each other, then at Charlotte. "We want you to stay," they said in unison, not the eerie synchronization of terrorized children, but the natural harmony of twins who'd rediscovered their connection. "Stay at the mansion," Lucas clarified. "Not as a nanny. We've hired a day nurse to help with the girls' routine while we all adjust. But as..." He struggled for words. "As family. The twins trust you. They feel safe with you. And I could use your help figuring out how to be a real father again." "You're already a real father," Charlotte said softly. "I'm trying to be. But I have years of distance to overcome. The girls and I are in therapy, together and separately. We're learning how to talk to each other again, how to be a family without Rebecca and without the shadow of Crane hanging over us. But you're part of that healing, Charlotte. You saved them. You saved me. And if you're willing..." His voice grew uncertain. "We'd like you to be part of what comes next." Charlotte looked at the three of them, Lucas with his earnest hope, the twins with their tentative smiles. She thought about her apartment, empty and waiting. She thought about job applications and background checks and starting over with yet another family. And then she thought about Evelyn's laugh when Charlotte had told her a silly joke yesterday. About Abigail's drawing of the four of them having a picnic, labeled, "Our New Family." About Lucas's determination to be present for his daughters, to rebuild what Crane had nearly destroyed. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay." The twins cheered, hugging her carefully around her still healing wound. Lucas's smile was warm and genuine, the smile of a man finally allowing himself to hope. The mansion was different when Charlotte returned. The west wing had been closed off again, but this time for renovation rather than preservation. Lucas planned to turn it into something new, maybe a library, maybe a music room for the twins. Something living rather than a shrine to the dead. The other changes were subtler but more profound. Curtains that had been drawn for 2 years now stood open, letting sunlight flood the marble halls. The twins' laughter echoed through rooms that had known only whispers and fear. Lucas worked from home more often, present for dinners and bedtimes and the small moments that made up a life. 6 weeks after Crane's death, on a quiet evening in early winter, Charlotte sat with the twins in their room while they got ready for bed. They'd painted their walls a cheerful yellow, replaced the formal furniture with cozy bean bags and bookshelves overflowing with stories. It looked like a room where children actually lived, not a museum display. "Charlotte," Evelyn said as Charlotte tucked her blankets around her. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. "You weren't supposed to survive. Mr. Crane told us once after the last nanny died, that no one would ever survive loving us. That we were cursed forever." Charlotte smoothed Evelyn's hair back from her forehead, her touch gentle. "And what do you think now?" "I think he was wrong," Abigail said from the other bed. "Because you're still here. And Daddy's still here. And we're not cursed." Charlotte smiled softly. "Then it's a good thing I don't follow rules. Especially ones made up by people who don't want you to be happy." Both girls grinned, real smiles, unguarded and bright. Charlotte kissed their foreheads, turned on their nightlight, shaped like stars now, not the eerie moon-shaped one Crane had chosen, and headed for the door. "Charlotte," Evelyn called out. "Do you think Mama would like you?" Charlotte paused, considering the question carefully. "I think your mama would be grateful that someone is helping you heal. And I think she'd want you to be happy, to feel safe, to know that loving people doesn't mean losing them." "We love you," Abigail said simply. The words hit Charlotte square in the chest. Unexpected, precious, terrifying in their vulnerability. She closed their door gently and found Lucas waiting in the hallway, having heard the exchange. His eyes were bright with emotion. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything. For staying. For helping us become a family again." "You were always a family," Charlotte replied. "You just needed help remembering it." They walked together down the grand staircase, the mansion settling into its nighttime quiet around them. Outside, the security lights illuminated the garden where Rebecca had died, where Crane had fallen. Lucas had planted new flowers there, bright, living things that grew despite the tragedy that had marked that ground. As they reached the foyer, the lights flickered once. Just a momentary dimming, probably the old wiring still adjusting to the mansion's resurrection. But Charlotte felt something shift in the air, something she couldn't quite name. Not threatening. Just present. A reminder that the past never fully leaves, that the dead remain in the memories and choices of the living. Did you feel that? Lucas asked, noticing her expression. Just the house settling, Charlotte said. But she wasn't entirely sure. That night, as Charlotte prepared for bed in her room, now permanently hers, redecorated with her own belongings and comfortable furniture, she thought about everything that had led her here. Her sister's death. The years in foster care. The determination to protect children no one else believed in. She'd saved the Miller twins. But in a strange way they'd saved her too. Given her a family when she'd never expected to have one. Given her a home that felt real. Charlotte was about to turn off her light when her phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. The twins asked if you'll have breakfast with us tomorrow. They're planning something, I think involving glitter. Fair warning. She smiled, typing back, I'll wear clothes I don't mind ruining. As she set her phone down and settled into bed, Charlotte caught a faint scent. Just a whisper of it, so subtle she might have imagined it. Jasmine and vanilla. Rebecca's perfume. Charlotte sat up, her heart rate spiking, but the scent was already gone. Just a memory maybe. Or a draft carrying old smells from the West Wing. She shook her head, lying back down. The mansion had its ghosts, everyone did. But they didn't have to be monsters. Sometimes the past was just there, watching, making sure the living kept their promises to the dead. I'll take care of them, Charlotte whispered to the darkness. I promise. The night settled around her, peaceful and still. But high above, on the West Wing's sealed balcony where no one had walked in weeks, where the French doors remained locked and the renovation hadn't yet begun, something moved in the moonlight. A single white rose, perfect and pristine, swayed gently in the winter breeze. Its stem was still wet with dew, as if it had just been placed there. As if someone, or something, was keeping watch over the family below, making sure the promises made in darkness were kept in light. The rose swayed once more, then went still. And in the Miller mansion, where 17 caregivers had failed and one had survived, a family slept peacefully for the first time in 2 years. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next. Click on the image or video showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.